Martin. I feel like I'm in here by myself. Let me try that again. Good evening, UT Martin. Welcome to the University of Tennessee at Martin 25th Anniversary Civil Rights Conference. In March of 1857, the United States Supreme Court, led by Chief Justice Roger B. Taney, declared that all blacks, slaves as well as free, were not and could never become citizens of the United States. Thus, the court also declared the 1820 Missouri Compromise as unconstitutional, therefore continuing slavery. The case before the court was Dred Scott versus Sanford. Dred Scott dared to have the audacity to sue the federal government for his freedom. And Justice Taney, a staunch supporter of slavery, very intent on protecting Southerners' rights, wrote the court's majority, which really speaks to why events like this are so very important. He said, and I quote, "Blacks had no rights which the white man was bound to respect, and that the Negro might justly and lawfully be reduced to slavery for his benefit. He was bought and sold and treated as an ordinary article of merchandise and traffic, whenever profit could be made by it," end quote. It's not lost on me that we're quoting an individual who lived in 1867. But that very statement could almost be made in 2025 and have some truth. What we have attempted to do this year, and we want to definitely pay homage to the individual who has been a critical linchpin in making this year's conference the success that I know it's going to be, and that is Dr. Henry Giles. I would be remiss if I did not mention her and thank her for all the work and leadership that she has put into this event, especially the work that she has done finding these amazing speakers like the one we have to present to you this evening. But we think about individuals when we talk about the theme of this year's conference, strength, courage, and wisdom. In terms of education and civil rights, we cannot forget individuals like Ruby Bridges, who was just here a few months ago. We cannot forget in the summer of 1961, here at the University of Tennessee at Martin, Miss Jessie Lou Arnold Pryor, Mr. Leroy Simmons, the first African-American students to be enrolled at this university. We cannot forget, and many of us hopefully can't even begin to imagine the challenges they faced to get an education, to live the Constitution that basically implied and stated in black and white that all men are created equal, which is to assume that the rights that are provided in that Constitution are provided to all of us. So we thank you again, and we hope that you will join us throughout this month. You can go to our website and find our events. We have a few more Michael Eric Dyson will be our next keynote speaker in a couple of weeks. We certainly hope that you will be able to join us for that event. We want to also acknowledge our students for being here. Next time you come, bring a friend, bring another friend. But without further ado, I want to introduce Ms. Johnson, who has the great distinction of being a member of the Delta Sigma Theta Sorority Incorporated, and she will be introducing our speaker.
Good evening, everyone. My name is Faith Johnson. I am a junior double majoring in business management and finance here at UT Martin. I am honored to introduce our speaker for tonight. Charlayne Hunter-Gault is an award-winning journalist with more than 50 years in the industry. She has been a fixture on national and international media outlets throughout her career. These include PBS Television, where we saw her on PBS NewsHour, listened to her on National Public Radio, and followed Ms. Hunter-Gault around the world covering stories for CNN. Most people came to know her when she was a college student in 1961. Before she became a news reporter, she was a news maker. Charlayne Hunter was the first Black woman to attend the University of Georgia. She and her classmate Hamilton Holmes paved the way for me and other Black students to walk through doors that had been closed to them. The concept of being barred from attending the school of your choice is difficult for me and others in our generation to grasp. That's why it's so important for us to hear and know the stories of people like Charlayne Hunter-Gault. Their sacrifices made it possible for us to be here. She began her journalism career as a reporter for The New Yorker and continues today as a contributing writer for the magazine. Charlayne Hunter-Gault built her career covering stories that weren't popular, with topics centering on inequality, race, and injustice, not just in this country, but around the world. In the early days of her media career, it was a profession where you were not likely to see a Black face on television or read a newspaper article written by a Black writer. Charlayne Hunter contributed to that change. She has received numerous awards, including 2 Emmy Awards and 2 Peabody Awards over her incredible career. She was inducted into the National Association of Black Journalists Hall of Fame, received the Black Enterprise Legacy Award, and the Washington Press Club Foundation's Lifetime Achievement Award. Ms. Hunter-Gault is also my soror, a member of Delta Sigma Theta Sorority Incorporated. Please give a warm Skyhawk welcome to our guest this evening, Ms. Charlayne Hunter-Gault.
Thank you so much. I just told my beautiful soror that she could give the speech for me if she wanted to. She did such a good job introducing me, but I'm just delighted to be here because every contact I've had today has just so inspired me and made me so happy that my husband, Ron, and I could be here today. I could respond to that wonderful introduction the same way that everybody else does on television these days by saying, thank you for having me. I'm so sick of people saying that. I wish they could get more creative. Every time I hear someone say that on television, I say to myself or my husband or anyone who's listening, can't they come up with something more original than thank you for having me? So I'm not going to say that this morning, although I have been very excited and honored about coming here ever since I got the invitation and saw the names of people that I have long admired, some of whom I've had the pleasure of knowing, like Nikki Giovanni, who was a speaker here once, and Eddie Glaude, and I think Michael Eric Dyson is coming, and I'm glad I don't have to follow him. He's going to be fabulous, as all of these speakers are. And I'm so pleased to stand before you today to add another wonderful journey to my life's journey that never ceases to amaze me. I experience renewal in encounters like this every single day. And I'm so grateful for this opportunity to be here with you and to experience some more renewal. Part of the wonder that surrounds my life's journey stems from the realization that you don't have to be really old and decrepit to have been an eyewitness to history. And dare I say, at this point, at 82, I like to think of myself as being woke, okay? Don't ask my husband about that, but anyway. Now, it's probably possible that really old has snuck up on me. But the history I have witnessed began when I was your age, some of your ages. And I would say that you don't have to be really old and decrepit, as I said, because at 82, I like to think of myself as woke. Now, it's possible that really old has snuck up on me, but the history I have witnessed began when I was very young. I have been fortunate, if not blessed, to have witnessed revolutions in my life as a participant and observer in one, and a passionate observer in a few others, like South Africa. And each one of those moments in my life's journey has fueled my path both professionally and personally. And each has also enabled me to see the promise of revolution. Each has enabled me to see the possibilities of peaceful revolution, as well as challenges that call for constant engagement on the part not only of people who brought about those revolutions, but people who benefited from them. And I think sometimes we have to remind people what they're benefiting from. I speak right now, of course, of the first instance of the American Civil Rights Revolution, which brought America closer to keeping her promise that all men and women are created equal. And of the revolution in South Africa, a little over 3 decades later, which I covered from 1985, before the revolution, when it was really awful down there, and in 1984, when Nelson Mandela was sworn in as president of a new society with laws that affirmed the equality of all men and women, including, unlike here in America, gay people. South Africa brought that into its constitution very early on. There's still challenges in both instances, here and in South Africa, challenges to overcome. But there is no doubt or denying the profound impact of those initial victories and the tools that got us there. Take our own revolution here as we triumphed over Jim Crow. Jim Crow laws created to keep us black folks in our place. For generations, the black family has put a premium on education. My father, who's no longer with us, but I learned in South Africa that when they go away from this earth, you just merely say they transition, because you can go and you can take your problems to them, as I sometimes do with all of those who've transitioned before me. But before my father transitioned, he remembers my grandfather telling him and his brother when they were young, get an education, boys, because that is going to be the key to our liberation. And in the case of my grandmother, she embraced his advice for both her children and herself, because she went back to school with her children in high school. No, they were not in high school, they were in the 3rd grade. And my grandmother joined them in the 3rd grade so she could get an education. And once I asked my uncle, I said, were you embarrassed to have your mother in your class when you were in the 3rd grade? And my uncle said, embarrassed? Why, no. We were so proud. Now, let me hasten to say what I've often said about how I got over, to quote that old spiritual, is that I was prepared for life by a suit of armor, what I call values. The suit of armor were values that were crafted by people like my grandmother, whom I just spoke about, and another grandmother, and by people of our community who functioned as extended family. The neighbors, the teachers at school, and Sunday school, because we had to go every Sunday. The same system that sought to oppress us created a bond among people that equipped them with the same value system, a value system that was cherished and nurtured in us. They were values that were timeless and values that were transcendent, and helped them and their children make a way out of no way. In our homes and in our segregated schools and black churches, those who taught us were not in a position to give us first-class citizenship, but they gave us a first-class sense of ourselves, and I call that armor. For example, once a year at our little segregated elementary school, the teachers often held a fundraiser to make up for the unequal allocation of resources from the white officials in charge of the segregated system, and who passed on to us the hand-me-down textbooks from the white schools, often with pages missing. Lunch was things like pig ear sandwiches. I kind of enjoyed those, but they weren't exactly what Michelle Obama might have approved us having. Still, the reward of the family raising the most money was that their child would be crowned king or queen of the school. Well, one year I watched my mother and my grandmother. They were very proper people. And they had these white linen handkerchiefs that they had wrapped all this money in, because they had gone all over Covington, Georgia, finding my uncle's girlfriends, and there were quite a few, although they didn't know each other. But they would go to all of them, and at some point, I heard one of the teachers say, after the monies had been counted, "We have a new queen." And I held my breath until I heard, "And our new queen is Charlayne Hunter." Well, I got a bull of a watch, which was nice, but my father was in the military and he could afford for me to have a bull of a watch, so that didn't really excite me. But it was the crown. Oh yes, it was ever the crown. I wore it every single day, to the annoyance of my girlfriends, who kept threatening me and telling me that they were going to do something that wasn't very pleasant if I didn't take off that crown. Well, I'm going to tell you in a few minutes one of the many ways that wearing that crown benefited me, but I didn't want to piss off my sisters any more than I already had, so I took off the crown. But the notion that I was a queen took up residence in my head. So hold on to that, because that's coming around again. Now, part of my armor was created in my early years. I used to sit at my grandmother's knee. She read 3 newspapers a day, and I would sit until she handed me the comics. And I fell in love with the comic strip character, Brenda Starr. Oh man, I wanted to be like Brenda Starr, who traveled the world in search of stories and people. Now, at that point, I had fallen in love with this Brenda Starr. Brenda Starr was a white reporter who traveled the world, as I said. And so I went to my mother one day and I said, "Mother, when I grow up, I want to be like Brenda Starr." And my mother didn't say, "That's not what little black girls in the South can do under these circumstances." No, she said in her usual soft-spoken voice, when I said I want to grow up to be like Brenda Starr, she just looked at me and she said, "Okay, if that's what you want to do." Well, that was the beginning. And in time, in my all-black school, I learned about Ida B. Wells, a black woman who was not only an investigative journalist, you know about her, but she was also a leader in the early civil rights movement. Have y'all heard of her, Ida B. Wells? Oh yeah, my sorors have heard of her, and the other sorors too, wherever you are. At any rate, she was not only an investigative journalist, but she was a leader in the early years of civil rights. And she was one of the founders of the National Association for the Advancement of Colored People. And as one of her biographies stated, Wells dedicated her career to combating prejudice and violence and advocating for African American equality, especially that of women. Now, there came a time when my family moved out of Covington and went up to the city, Atlanta. I attended still segregated schools, but they were named for black pioneers like Henry McNeil Turner, which you didn't enter without knowing or soon learning the history of Henry McNeil Turner. And I was so pleased that I had a little bit of a connection to him, because he was born free in the 1800s in South Carolina, in an Abbeville County, which contained due west, where I was born. Now, for the longest time, people would say, "Where were you born?" And I would say due west, and they would say, "Due west of what?" And I later learned I could say it was due west of, it was in Abbeville County. And to show you how things can change, and they can, even though we get a little disappointed these days, but I was happy to be invited back a few years ago to give the commencement address at Erskine College, which was in due west. So our teachers made sure that we were clothed not only with this kind of information, but in historical armor, but that so many other people had said, "This will help you make a way out of no way." So when I was a senior in high school, and I was called to the principal's office, there were several black professional men who believed that Georgia had waited far too long to implement the 1954 Supreme Court decision. Now, I was recently at a school predominantly black, and I mentioned the 54 decision. And these were all young students, and so I said, "You all have heard of the 54 decision, right?" And that's how they looked at me. So I explained what the 54 decision was. And to my amazement, the black teacher, the young black teacher who had invited me to the school and who sat through my interview, walked me to my car, and on the way to my car, this was just a few years ago, she confessed that she didn't know. A black teacher confessed that she did not know about the Brown decision, and she was teaching our children. So it was when I was a senior in high school and was called to the principal's office. There were these several black men who believed that Georgia had waited too long to implement the decision, and they wanted to take us to the local college, all-white college, Georgia State. Our principal sent for Hamilton Holmes, who was the #1 student in our class, and me. Now, I was number 3. I mean, I could have been number 2, but I wasn't. So it was because of math. Don't tell anybody that. But at any rate, I was number 3, but I was also editor of the student newspaper, among other things. And when we were told why we were there, what these black men were after, we didn't hesitate. We said, yes, we'd like to apply. But when we got down there and looked at the curriculum, Hamilton, I have to give him credit. I don't always give him credit, but I have to give him credit for this. He put down the papers that had the curriculum of Georgia State, and he said, I don't want to go here. Here's a black student saying, raised in a black family, raised in a black school, saying of a white school, which is supposed to be superior, he was saying, this isn't good enough. And the men looked and said, uh-oh, we've lost an opportunity. But then Hamilton, and I have to give him credit, I don't always, but I'll give him credit, he walked out onto the podium on the porch of Georgia State, and he pointed north, and he said, I want to go there. And there was where? You got it, University of Georgia. And while the men were surprised, and they were also concerned because they didn't have any contacts in Athens, Georgia, where UGA is located, and yet they agreed and reached out to the top lawyer in Atlanta, Donald Hollowell, also now transitioned. And within a short period of time, Attorney Hollowell had reached out to a fabulous lawyer by the name of Constance Baker Motley, the top legal defense, NAACP legal defense fund lawyer, and along with Attorney Hollowell's law clerk, Vernon Jordan, and Horace Ward, a young lawyer who had applied to UGA a while back but didn't pursue the case when he was turned down. And as you probably know, because I think that may have been in my introduction, the rest, as is said, is history. For I was later to recall of that beginning in my autobiography, In My Place, and I wrote, on January 9th, 1961, I walked onto the campus of the University of Georgia to begin registering for classes. Ordinarily, there would not have been anything unusual about such a routine exercise, except in this instance, the officials at the university had been fighting for almost 2 years to keep me out. I was not socially, intellectually, or morally undesirable. But you know what it was. I was black, and no black student had ever been admitted to the University of Georgia in its 175-year history. But history was on the last thing that was on my mind when my little tiny mother, Vernon Jordan, who was this tall, and I walked through the hostile mobs. In fact, as I heard the hostile mobs yelling, and I hope you'll forgive me for saying this, but you need to know what they said. They were yelling, "Nigger, go home." I was looking around for the nigger because I was going back to those days at my elementary school when my mother and grandmother had raised the most money and I had been crowned queen. So here I was, a queen. And what I call that, which is so important today, that we clothe our children with the armor of our history, because that will get us through many a toil and trial. It is also the case that the same values, armor, wrapped a generation of young people in the armor they needed to put their bodies on the line in sit-ins and other types of demonstrations to bring America to its promise. I think of friends of mine in Atlanta who are no longer with us. They've transitioned to Carolyn Long Banks and Wilma Long and John Lewis. And John Lewis was on the trail when they walked across the Edmund Pettus Bridge in Selma, Alabama. And candidate Barack Obama, who also walked across the stage the case that day, told the crowd that one that came to hear him, he said, "I stand on the shoulders of giants." And when he was sworn in as America's first black president, he autographed a picture to John Lewis saying, "I am who I am because of you." Now, the more I learned about this school, the more I wrote little things in the sides. So you have to forgive me when I say, oops, was I supposed to be there? But let me just say this. Likewise, my history, like Barack Obama's history, taught to him by his white mother, by the way, but it served as my armor after Hamilton and I were admitted, and when students and others, and I think it was mostly others, gathered outside my dorm shouting for me to go home. Now, Georgia had lost a basketball game to their main rival, Georgia Tech. I'm not going to mention the Georgia Dogs in here because I don't think that would be well received. But anyway, you know what I'm talking about. I see you smiling. Some of you don't know. If you want to know, come see me afterwards, but I don't want to say it publicly. Anyway, the university had put me in a room on the first floor where there were no other students. I could hear them shouting the N-word, "Go home." And at one point, one of them threw a rock through my window, causing glass to spread all over my clothes and my as yet unpacked suitcase. And within no time, the dean came to my room and told me to get ready. I was being suspended for my own safety. Since boys weren't required to live on campuses, Hamilton was living with a black supportive family a few minutes away from campus and didn't know what had happened that night when the dean came and told him that we were both being sent back to Atlanta because we had been suspended. State patrolmen were there to take us. But Hamilton wanted to drive his new car that his grandfather, a doctor, had bought for him because We had been told not to hitchhike like the white students because it might be dangerous, and there was no other way to get around. So he bought Hamilton a car, and Hamilton loved that car. And so when they told us that we were going back to Georgia because of the riots, he didn't know about the riot, but we told him there had been a riot. And so he started saying, okay, let me get in my car. And I said, no, you can't drive. And he said, no, but I want to drive my car. Well, the one thing that Hamilton didn't like about me was when I showed out, especially when I showed out in front of white people. And so I said, but no, you can't drive. I said, all those people up and down from here to Atlanta, they wear white sheets and they're going to do dirty things if they see us in the car. You got to go. And he was so embarrassed. I don't think he listened to me saying that there were going to be people attacking us. I think he was just embarrassed by me shouting in front of all these people, including these white policemen. And so he said, okay, I won't drive. And once again, it was very late when we arrived in Atlanta, but early the next morning, reporters showed up at my mother's door wanting to talk to us about what had happened. And one of the first questions they asked was, how scary was it last night after that riot outside your dorm and all the other stuff that was going on? And I jumped in ahead of Hamp and said, it wasn't scary at all. And they were all surprised and asked, why wasn't it scary? And once again, I called on one of the lessons my grandmother had taught me from her Bible. Lessons at an early age I wasn't happy about learning because it meant that I had to stop. She sat every day waiting to teach me Bible verses, and I didn't want to learn them. So I would climb the mango tree, and sometimes I'd eat the mangoes, whether they were ripe or not. My mouth would go like that. But I was up in the mango tree, trying to keep from having my grandmother make me learn a Bible verse. But she was very patient. And every day, she would insist that I learn a Bible verse, one of which was, and this was the answer, remember, when they asked me, weren't we scared of the riot outside of my dorm? And I said, no. And they said, why? I said, because of what my parents and my grandparents taught me. And they said, what was that? And I said, yea, though I walk through the valley of the shadow of death, I will fear no evil. Thy rod and thy staff, they comfort me all the days of my life. And meanwhile, our lawyers were on the case, and they went to court the following day and got an order to have us readmitted. And as I said, the rest is history. And by the way, speaking of history, I hope that you have seen the beautiful stamp with Constance Baker Motley's lovely picture on it. I think it's now been out for a couple of years, and I think that it's a great honor that she well deserved. But speaking of more valuable history, not long ago, I was interviewed about this and other aspects of my life's journey at an event for older people. It was in a church in Sarasota, Florida. And at the end, when it was time for questions, the first person who got up was an elderly, as I said, it was an event for older people. So it was an older white man who had a handful of pages. And I thought, oh God, where is he going with this? But he started reading from the pages. And he went on to, he told us that he had been a pre-med student at the same time that Hamilton was at the University of Georgia in the pre-med department. And the word had gone around for some time about how Hamilton was setting the curve higher than most of the pre-med students, much higher, in fact, because these were country boys from the South, and, you know, if they made a 49 or 50 on a test, that was an A before Hamp got there, and all of Hamp's tests resulted in 98s, 99s, 100. So this white student who showed up at this event, and he was standing there right where my husband is taking notes to tell me where I messed up. No, just get my phone out of my bag because I'm going to need it in a few minutes. Yeah, that one. Okay, so this white student is standing there with this handful of papers, and I'm here, and he's there, and I'll get in a minute. And he starts reading from this paper. And he said the word had gone around for some time about how Hamp was setting the curve. So this white student who refused to speak to Hamilton, but watched and did everything Hamilton did because he knew what Hamilton was, what he could do, what he was able to do. He watched everything. Hamilton would put something in a thing, I don't know anything about the biology because Hamp used to tutor me, but I never did it very well. But the white student refused to speak to Hamilton. But like Hamilton, he passed the course with flying colors. But it took him all these years to admit what he had done and what he owed Hamilton. And now, of course, Hamilton was gone. This man had become a successful orthopedic surgeon, as Hamilton did, but here he was, now in his 80s, apologizing for the first time for his inaction. By the way, I shared this with Hamilton's family not long after that. But Hamilton was also still alive when the governor of Georgia, who when Hamilton and I applied to the University of Georgia, had sworn in his words, "No, not one," meaning no, not one black student. The governor said this, "No, not one black student will ever come and attend the University of Georgia." But this man, he just brought tears to my eyes, because even though he was as old as I was, it had been Hamilton who had made him the success that he became. And again, when Hamilton was also still alive years before, the governor of Georgia, who when Hamilton and I applied, swore in his words, no, not one black student would ever be allowed to attend the University of Georgia. And like the 82-year-old I just told you about, he came to the university's 40th anniversary of desegregation, and the former governor apologized for his words. And give the lessons of our history, we thanked him. Hamilton, by the way, passed when he was only 54 years old. He had served our country in the military in Germany before becoming the first black student at Emory Medical School, and eventually he became head of orthopedic surgery at Grady Hospital, the large public hospital in Atlanta. And I tell you, I'm not a doctor, but I read a lot. And I've read a lot about PTSD And sometimes it's too late. I mean, there's no way we would ever know. But I'm thinking that what contributed to Hamilton's early demise, possibly, was PTSD. But being a journalist and an African American poses some of the same challenges as being African American working in America, so eloquently described many years ago by the great African scholar W.E. Du Bois. One ever feels, he says, this two-ness of being an American and a Negro. Two souls, two thoughts, two unreconciled strivings, two warring ideals in one dark body, whose dogged strength alone keeps it from being torn asunder. And no wonder. When I was being interviewed, for example, by a New York Times editor just before being hired as a reporter, this was in the late 1960s, he asked if I thought I could tell the truth when covering Black people in Harlem. Well, I'm going to let you figure out my answer when I tell you that in no time I had convinced that editor to not only let me report from Harlem, but to open a New York Times Harlem bureau, which didn't happen anywhere in the world with any newspaper. This was the first in any Black community where I could see up close and personal all that was going on in that community, the good, and yes, and if necessary, but without predisposition, the ugly. And it was a wonderful time in my journalistic journey, presenting Harlem in ways that were rarely ever written about. For example, I started writing about the people of Harlem, no matter what they were doing, and one was this little old man about this tall, and he had a bookstore. And the bookstore was a two-story building, sort of building, but everybody came there because his collection was so full of Black history. And he was also full of poems. And even the white people who came enjoyed his poems, or at least they seemed to like them. One of his poems was, "The white man's dream of being supreme has turned to sour cream." And everybody just thought that was really great. Now, in time, I am happy to say, I was able to bring my perspective to the news program run by Robert McNeil and Jim Lehrer, now both transitioned, who practiced what they preached. Summarized by Jim, who always said, "Give people good information and they will do the right thing." And I wore that armor all over the world, including to South Africa in the 80s, before Mandela's release, and after his release, when a country that hopefully, and we're still hoping, would guarantee rights to all of its people and be successful as a country. When I interviewed, I was sent to South Africa when Nelson Mandela got out of jail, and I had developed relationships with his colleagues throughout the years because I suspected that sooner or later South Africa was going to become an interracial country. And when Mr. Mandela was finally released from prison, I got one of 2 half-hour interviews. Everybody else, there were journalists from all over the world. Everybody else got 10 minutes. I got a half an hour. And so I wanted to make myself distinctive. And so when he finished the last interview and it was my time, I said, "Oh, Mr. Mandela, it's so nice to meet you, but you've been sitting there, and he just got out of jail. He'd been in jail 27 years. And I said, wouldn't you like to take a break? I wanted to come in different from everybody else. So he said, oh, okay. So he goes in, he takes a break, and he comes in. And then I still wanted to establish myself as different from all these other journalists from all over the world. So I said, I wanted to tell him that I had been involved in the American Civil Rights Revolution. And I started to go into detail about my history, but before I could, he jumped in and he asked me, he said, do you know Miss Maya Angelou? I was really surprised about that, because they've been in prison for 27 years. Well, the thing is, I didn't know her personally, but I didn't think it was wrong to say yes because I knew her work, okay? Well, I got one of the scoops of the day, since everybody wanted to know how Mandela had survived all those years in prison. And he quickly said, in the formal way he related to himself, well, he said, he said to me, do you know Miss Maya Angelou? And I had to say, sort of, I did. I mean, I knew her work. But when I answered the question, I got one of the scoops of the day, because everyone wanted to know how Mandela had served all of those years in prison and still come out looking strong and talking beautifully. And he just said, we read all of her books while we were in prison. And you journalists would know that was a scoop that I had. And so, as we see almost daily in the United States and South Africa and other parts of the world, there's still challenges to overcome. But as Dr. King told us, the moral arc of the universe is long, but it bends towards justice. And even at the woke old age of 82, or maybe especially at the woke old age of 82, I am determined to promote a coalition of the generations, which is why I'm so glad I see my sorors here, and I see other sorors, and I see older people and younger people. We need everybody, so that we need a coalition of the generations so that each generation can benefit from the other, especially now, since far too many schools are not teaching our history. In fact, I witnessed the firsthand a short while back, and I think I told you, did I tell you this a few minutes ago, that I went to this school and this teacher never heard of the Brown decision? And there have been studies in the Southern Poverty Law Center that show even before the latest attacks on Black history, schools were not adequately teaching Black history, starting with slavery. And so today, as other days, I am calling for a coalition of the generations to help combat all of the problems that we have today. We need a coalition of the generations to help fight ignorance about our nation and about our people who are the nation. Whether they wear farmers' overalls or Muslim garb, whether they are native-born or new to a nation proudly known since its founding as a nation of immigrants. I mean, that's become a dirty word lately, but we are a nation of immigrants. Ignorance of the world in which we do our grocery shopping, as well as the world from which we get our fuel to cook the groceries that can't be eaten raw. Ignorance that has resulted in the U.S. dropping to the second tier of countries with young adults getting college degrees, while countries like China and India are investing heavily in education as the key to having strong, vibrant economies. I believe Dr. King would be speaking out, but in the way he always did, constructively criticizing, exhorting, but in ways that healed rather than wounded. I was not one of those who didn't believe we would see a black man in the White House as president. But I also don't believe that Obama's victory would necessarily and instantaneously lead us to a post-racial society. And the journalist in me is wondering at this critical moment in our history, how and when and by whom do we take this nation forward to create more armor for the coming years? And finally, I want to leave you with some of the best advice I've ever had. It came from that young black lawyer. I need my phone. Husband, I need my phone. If you want me to stop talking, you have to give me the phone. That's how he dances, too. He's a good dancer, by the way. But at any rate, I haven't shared all of my stories, including why I went on to write so many books, and one about Africa that looked at it a different way, not just in terms of all the bad things you hear, but also I've tried to keep alive the people who have helped me survive by giving them and their children and their grandchildren armor. Our history is our armor. So now I'm going to give you some of the best advice I've ever had. It came from the young black lawyer, Vernon Jordan, who walked me into the University of Georgia, who went on to become himself not only a leader in civil rights, but in the business world. And this is what he said one day as he was giving a talk to a group of students. And I just thought, these are the words that we all need to know and say as often as possible. He said, "I have come to say to you this morning, we have been here before. But our journey also teaches us that endurance is not enough. Listen, we do not sing, we shall endure. What do we sing? We shall overcome. We shall overcome. We shall overcome someday. Oh, deep in my heart, I do believe we shall overcome someday. Can we? Can we overcome? Thank you.
I'm John Chom. I'm a recently retired professor in the math department here. In the math department. But I was a huge fan of yours from the McNeil-Lehrer NewsHour all those years ago. And I clean forgot that you had gotten your start with South Africa reporting. And so I'm wondering what you think of the situation in South Africa today.
The world is in turmoil, as is this on? Is it on? I can go back to that mic. Okay.
Testing, testing.
I was saying the world is in turmoil, and so is South Africa. And I spent many years covering the African continent and reporting on the good, the bad, the ugly. And it deeply pains me to see what's going on in South Africa right now, as is the case in other places where people are not adhering to the basic principles of democracy, that all people should be treated equally and fairly. Even Mandela is being desecrated by some of the people, and that's really hard to believe because he was everybody's hero, including mine. We developed a wonderful friendship while he was president, and it's just very painful to see what is happening there. But I think that those who are fighting to bring South Africa back to where it was intended to be once it ended apartheid looks at that history in South Africa in the term Ubuntu, I am who I am because you are who you are, and attempt to reach out, especially to younger people, because a lot of the dismay right now is coming from the younger people who have no options in the society. They have not been well educated, and right now the leadership is in turmoil and fighting against one another. So I happen to think that there are still good people. I know that there are still good people in South Africa who are going to try to keep it on the right path. And the right path is the same that we have here, to see that all people appreciate and treat all people equally. And some people still go to South Africa and go on safaris. They don't call them game drives. They don't call them safaris. And that's pleasant enough. But the country itself is in turmoil and needs help. Any other questions? You want to go to the mic? You can wear your hat. I like your hat.
As a journalist with such a storied career, what concerns, if any, do you have about the impact of social media providing the information that most of us consume these days?
Again, as they say on television, and that's a good question. I have to say that you know, they say getting old ain't for sissies, and I didn't exactly pick up on TikTok myself, but the woman who does my braids gets all of her news from TikTok. So she started to educate me in how to look at the TikTok. But do you think it's going to be around a while? There's war against it. And, You don't see it lasting?
No, I see it.
Oh, you see it? Yeah. Well, here's the thing. I think it's very important that we all try to get a variety of news. And I know sometimes my husband, Ron, wants to look at something, a station that I don't care much about. I'm not going to mention which one it is. But I also think that's important too, that we know what people are thinking, so that we can come to good conclusions about how to be good citizens. And I give everybody, whether you have a college degree or not, I mean, people can be intelligent without a college degree. And so I'm hoping that more of our young people will be able to get college degrees, but also not to give up on people who don't have them. And I think our history is such that we have to protect it. And I think that, to be perfectly honest, I'm a little worried about the news, and more so when people I know who have great experience and professionalism are being let go or put into situations where they don't get seen, like at midnight. You know who that was. And Jim Acosta, if some of you don't know. And he asked a question in one of the new president's first press conferences the other day. I was surprised he called on him. He called on him, but then he didn't let him follow up. So I'm hopeful that we don't have any more situations like that. But this is where people like yourselves, even my young sisters over here, have to insist on good information. Now, how you do that, you can go to this professor here and get it from her, Professor Henry. You have got to get good information so that you can make good decisions about your lives. And if you're not getting good information, you need to figure out how to demand it. And I think that's possible. I am truly worried about our profession. I am truly worried that every day you look and see more professional journalists being let go. And honestly, I'm not sure how to combat that, but I think once you recognize the problem is when you can work on solving it. And that's one of the things I hope that I will be able to contribute to. Like Yamiche Elsindor, isn't she fantastic? We got to keep Yamiche in that position. But we have to stand up, speak out, write your editor, write editors, write people who are in charge, and say what is troubling you about either what they are doing or not doing. And I think that that is a very important way for us to get good information. Anybody else?
Throughout your career, you've witnessed and reported on significant social and political changes. What do you believe is the most pressing issue today in the fight for racial justice, and how can young activists best contribute to the meaningful progress?
Can you repeat that for me?
Oh.
Can you speak up a little louder?
Okay. Throughout your career, you've witnessed and reported on significant social and political changes. What do you believe is the most pressing issue today in the fight for racial justice, and how can young activists best contribute to meaningful progress?
Thank you for that good question. I think I've sort of answered it in a certain way, but maybe not enough. You've got to know your history, and you've got to appreciate that your history is your armor, so that if you have to take up a fight with some channel that isn't giving you the proper news or is getting rid of people who give you good news, figure out how you weigh in on that. And if you can't do that, work on your school newspaper and make sure that your students, your colleagues, get good education, which means you have to educate yourself. And there are ways that you can educate yourself. TikTok, I guess, is one. It ain't mine, but it's yours. And maybe you can help me a little bit after this to figure out why I should be doing TikTok. But yeah, I think that you just have to speak up and speak out. And when you're in an environment like this, where you have people who are supportive of you, that's a good time to speak up and speak out or go and get good advice. And you've got people here who've been in the profession, who teach things that will help you learn how to analyze what's going on in the world. But you need to know. And as lovely as this campus is, you need to get your mind a little bit beyond it sometimes, so that what you're learning here will help you deal with the problems beyond where you are right now. So I'm very excited about each and every one of you here today, and the potential you have for helping us on the road to a more perfect union. Any more?
Hello, my name is Lynn Templeton. I graduated from this school many years ago, so, but anyway, my wife and I, we went to South Africa a little over a year ago, and we found that many of our friends, there are a lot of African Americans that are there, that are around my age, and so we are considering starting a manufacturing operation there. And I just wanted to know if you had any inside information. Do you think, I know it's a revolution going on right now. It's a good thing because they are taking responsibility for themselves. And China is losing the manufacturing of the world is leaving China and going to Africa because Africa has the correct composition in terms of young people. Most of the young people are under 21, and everything else is lined up. So, but anyway, I just wanted to know if you had any insight that might be beneficial in some kind of way.
I'm going to do something that I probably will get divorced from, but I'm going to ask my husband, who, when we left for South Africa and spent 17 years there. My husband was head of JP Morgan Bank and was very close to President Mandela as he helped him get a lot of the black professionals educated at a higher level in the United States. So, and then one year, the two of us decided, we liked wine so much, we decided to make it. So we made wine and we came back here to America and you know, peddled the wine. But then we got tired of that because we got tired of South Africa, which wasn't producing the grapes that we needed. But anyway, if you remember the question, could you please, this is Ron Gault, my husband of 53 years, who's
Yeah, well, thank you for the question, and Charlayne, thank you so much for that wonderful introduction. One of, I think, the first things you have to consider as a business person going into any country, particularly going into South Africa, is why are you going there? I mean, are you going because of some spiritual need you need to connect with the continent, and reconnect with your people, reconnect with your heritage? Are you going out of some genuine business interest, driven by a business priority, and is to be successful? And once you sort that out, I think then you kind of focus on what it is. What are you going to produce? How competitive can you be producing it? And what kind of market are you looking to develop? You're trying to develop a market in South Africa, Europe, the United States, southern states. And I speak because when we went, we were followed by a number of others, and we followed a number of others. Many black Americans who said, oh, here is the new promised land. And I had I had a friend who decided that this new South Africa needed really a new approach to business. And one approach to business would be how you equip your office. And my God, with all these new business people, they're going to need state-of-the-art furniture. And they're going to need help in designing their offices. And that's a really basic idea, right? Business idea, okay. So he convinced a U.S. company manufacturing office furniture to set him up as their company representative in Africa. Sounds like a pretty good idea, and really modernistic furniture looking and whatnot. It carried a U.S. price tag. Now, what he didn't realize in his business planning was that the rand was in a state of fluctuation. When he started his discussions, the rand ratio to the dollar was 10 to 1. That is, you had to have 10 rand to equal $1. By the time he set that business up, that ratio had fluctuated to 17 to 1. Right? Never entered his mind about how this is going to affect my business. Well, the result of that was, you can kind of figure it out, is this American-made furniture wasn't being consumed by this South African market. He went out of business and kind of tucked his tail and came back to the States after a few years. So, I mean, it's a sad story, and there are probably a few stories that are fairly successful. I know one guy was into a communication towers business, very sophisticated business. He did okay. But, you know, for as many of those who did okay, I can give you 10 who didn't do okay, because they didn't have a business plan that looked at those various elements that lead to success. So I don't know what your business is, I don't know how much inventory you have, I don't know what kind of workforce you're going to have, but those are some of the elements you need to really look at before going in. Now, my wife mentioned kind of casually, we went into the wine business. Well, I was a banker. My business was banking. My avocation was making wine and drinking it. And we did that for about 10 years. And it was pretty good, but there were a number of elements that went into that making the wine, I mean, going out and taking these grapes and tasting the grapes and working with the winemaker. Oh, this is a fantastic Cabernet. This is a fantastic Chardonnay. In fact, my wife came up with the best Chardonnay ever, and she didn't know jack about making wine. But at any rate, at the end of the day, you know, you have to separate your passion from your business acumen. And if you can do that and sort that out, and I'll kind of end this long narrative, but you can see I feel very strongly about it. But I know too many people have gotten scorched because of the enthusiasm of being on the ground there doing something that is positive. So take some of those elements into consideration, put your money on the line, and step forward as a capitalist.